A taxicab, also known as a taxi or a cab, is a type of vehicle for hire with a driver, used by a single passenger or small group of passengers, often for a non-shared ride. A taxicab conveys passengers between locations of their choice. This differs from public transport where the pickup and drop-off locations are decided by the service provider, not by the customers. Although demand-responsive transport and share taxis provide a hybrid bus-taxi mode. There are 4 distinct forms of taxicab, which can be identified by slightly differing terms in different countries. Although types of vehicles and methods of regulation, hiring, dispatching, and negotiating payment differ significantly from country to country, many common characteristics exist. Disputes over whether ride-sharing companies should be regulated, as taxicabs resulted in some jurisdictions creating new regulations for these services. Taxicab is a compound word formed from contractions of taxameter and cabriolet. Quote: Taxameter is an adaptation of the German word taxameter, which was itself a variant of the earlier German word taxonon. Taxi meaning measure. A cabriolet is a type of horse-drawn carriage, from the French word cabriolet. In most European languages, that word has taken on the meaning of a convertible car. The taxicabs of Paris were equipped with the first meters beginning on 9 March 1898. They were originally called taxibread, then renamed taxameters on 17 October 1904. Harry Nathaniel Allen of the New York Taxicab Company, who imported the first 600 gas-powered New York City taxicabs from France in 1907, borrowed the word taxicab from London, where the word was in use by early 1907. An alternative, folk etymology holds that it was named for Franz von Taxis, from the House of Thurn and Taxis, a 16th-century postmaster for Philip of Burgundy, and his nephew Johann Baptist von Taxis, general postmaster for the Holy Roman Empire. Both instituted fast and reliable postal services across Europe. Horse-drawn for hire hackney carriage services began operating in both Paris and London in the early 17th century. The first documented public hackney coach service for hire was in London in 1605. In 1625, carriages were made available for hire from innkeepers in London, and the first taxi rank appeared on the Strand outside the Maypole Inn in 1636. In 1635, the Hackney Carriage Act was passed by Parliament to legalise horse-drawn carriages for hire. Coaches were hired out by innkeepers to merchants and visitors. A further ordinance for the regulation of hackney coachmen in London and the places adjacent was approved by Parliament in 1654, and the first hackney carriage licenses were issued in 1662. A similar service was started by Nicolas Sauvage in Paris in 1637. His vehicles were known as fiacres, as the main vehicle depot apparently was opposite a shrine to Saint Fiacre. The hansom cab was designed and patented in 1834 by Joseph Hansom, an architect from York, as a substantial improvement on the old hackney carriages. These two-wheel vehicles were fast, light enough to be pulled by a single horse, were agile enough to steer around horse-drawn vehicles in the notorious traffic jams of 19th century London, and had a low center of gravity for safe cornering. Hansom's original design was modified by John Chapman and several others to improve its practicability, but retained Hansom's name. These soon replaced the hackney carriage as a vehicle for hire. They quickly spread to other cities in the United Kingdom, as well as continental European cities, particularly Paris, Berlin, and St. Petersburg. The cab was introduced to other British Empire cities and to the United States during the late 19th century, being most commonly used in New York City. The first cab service in Toronto, the city, was established in 1837 by Thornton Blackburn, an ex-slave whose escape when captured in Detroit was the impetus for the Blackburn riot. Electric battery-powered taxis became available at the end of the 19th century. In London, Walter Bursey designed a fleet of such cabs and introduced them to the streets of London on 19 August 1897. They were soon nicknamed hummingbirds, due to the idiosyncratic humming noise they made. In the same year in New York City, the Samuels Electric Carriage and Wagon Company began running 12 electric hansom cabs. The company ran until 1898 with up to 62 cabs operating until it was reformed by its financiers to form the Electric Vehicle Company. The modern taximeter was invented and perfected by a trio of German inventors: Wilhelm Friedrich Nedler, Ferdinand Denker and Friedrich Wilhelm Gustav Brunn. The Daimler Victoria, the world's first gasoline-powered taximeter cab, was built by Gottlieb Daimler in 1897 and began operating in Stuttgart in 1897. Gasoline-powered taxicabs began operating in Paris in 1899, in London in 1903, and in New York in 1907. The New York taxicabs were initially imported from France by Harry N.